Welcome back to our fourth paramotoring common mistakes video, and on this one it's all about flying. So in the last video we finished off with the takeoff procedure. Now immediately after you've taken off, you're in the air. Okay, first common mistake, people get far too comfortable and think, fantastic, I'm flying and I'm going to start looking at my instruments, I'm going to start focusing on where I'm going to fly to next. No, you have now got to go through the climb out procedure. Okay, so you need to maintain a course into wind. You need to keep your landing gear down, because if you have an engine failure, this is the most dangerous time. You need to be able to land and run that off. So if we've correctly chosen our flying site, we have a buffer zone. We have an area where we can still land in the event of an engine failure after 20-30 feet. However, main thing here is keep climbing into wind. Do not attempt to get in the seat or get comfortable, and definitely do not bury too much brake. We've already said that the reference is around about the chest, and do not turn across the wind line dynamically. Okay, you haven't got the experience at this stage to be able to suddenly crank in a slalom type turn. This is where flying low and flying aggressively brings about many accidents. So a correct and safe takeoff is going to be one where you climb out at about 30 degrees and you keep climbing to a safe altitude before you then turn, normally with the torque, but it depends on your obstacles, in order to come back round downwind and climb out over your takeoff area. Do not make the mistake of taking off and immediately turning, or burying both brakes, or lifting your legs up and getting into the seat. Use that safe buffer zone I've just talked about in order to give yourself that margin for error. The next thing with flying is common sense. And a lot of people don't seem to have much common sense once they've got in the air. They seem to think that some mythical being is going to look after them. And when I say common sense, you need to be constantly checking for other pilots in the sky, the weather changing, any form of update to the airspace being changed, and all of your landing or emergency landing options. If you're going on a cross-country flight, you should be constantly registering fields that you can land in, as well as obstacles, whether they are wires, buildings, trees, mountains, whatever it might be. Okay, so with that in mind, a common sense thing to focus on is height. Height equals time equals safety. Okay, the higher you are, the more time you have to be able to safely land back on the ground in the event of an engine failure. For some reason, people like to ignore this particular fact, and they love flying low and they get caught out. So if you are in an area like this is actually a safer area. We're in a very flat area north of Italy. This is ideal for low flying if done correctly, into wind, in an area where there aren't obstacles, where you've got emergency landing areas all the time. However, in the mountains, the worst thing to do is be flying low, because we need to be flying high, constantly thinking where can we land in order to get back to a safe landing area in the event of an engine failure. When flying with other people, common thing I see with pilots is tunnel vision, and then they're flying focused on the landscape or whatever the hell is going through their head. And whenever I see a pilot who's basically got tunnel vision, I avoid them like the plague. What I want to see with pilots is they're moving their heads as much as possible. And one of the tricks I use is counting. So I will register all the various gliders in the sky, and especially when they're different colors, you can start to count and identify who that may be if you're flying in a group. And if you can't count the full number of your group, there's a possibility that they are actually quite close to you or behind you, okay, which is a bad place to be. So never fly directly behind, directly above, directly below, or directly off to either side of a pilot, okay? Especially when you're starting out in this sport, because the closer you get to each other, the more chance there is of a mid-air collision. To avoid that, we're going to be looking everywhere, we're going to be counting, and we're going to be trying to identify who they are. So one of the common mistakes people make is not being able to change their plans according to the weather. And the weather changes, okay? In flight, it can change like this. And the forecast cannot be accurate sometimes. So you need to be able to change your flight plans according to what the weather is dictating. So if that wind is picking up, you're going to want to get on the ground a lot quicker than you'd originally planned. The other thing is to plan your cross-country flights into wind or across wind so that you can come back, okay? Ideally into wind, because your slow leg is going to be the first half of your flight and the return journey is going to be really fast, okay? However, you cannot rely on the forecast, so you need to be able to change your plans at all times. Related to the weather is obviously rotor. Do not position yourself downwind of turbulent areas, okay? And when I say turbulent area, it could be anything from a tree to a massive mountain, okay? So think about where you're flying in terms of the downwind rotor. The same applies to putting yourself downwind of a paramotor. They generate a lot of turbulence, these things. So do not fly directly behind someone's wake for at least a minute. And with trikes, you could even go for a longer period of time. So this is the common sense that we're trying to get people to use. One of the best ways to actually see what your ground speed is to do what I call the 4 points of the compass. So position yourself north, south, east and west, and to see where you're getting your biggest ground speed, okay? Your speed over the ground, and that's going to now show you where your wind's coming from. It's particularly important when you're flying cross country and you haven't got any wind socks or any wind indicators. But I am going to be looking out for ripples on the lake, any smoke. Smoke's a fantastic telltale, any flags that might be positioned on property or near them. So yeah, use the natural signs to be able to work out where the wind's coming from. Another way to use this, obviously it's technology, so it's not 100% reliable, a bit like Hawkeye in cricket or VAR, yeah, in football. So it is to use Gaggle. Yeah? Gaggle does actually tell you and show you kind of roughly where the wind's coming from at altitude. The computer is working out what your ground speed is in relation to the wind. So that is a useful tool, but yet again, nothing beats you actually feeling the glider and noticing the way it's performing in relation to the wind. The 500-foot rule. We're probably all guilty of breaking it, aren't we? So this is something we need to change. Otherwise, we're going to find the CAA is going to come and shut us down, especially in the UK. So we need to ensure that we are in fact flying 500 foot from any person, vessel, structure or object having taken off or before we come into land. And the best way to do that is using an altimeter, and yet again Gaggle is a good option for this. However, there's also the possibility to have a separate Vario which you can strap to your instrument deck to give you an independent or slightly more accurate altimeter reading. Airspace restrictions, breaching them, we've already discussed this, but it's important that we don't breach these airspace regs. And yet again, Gaggle or SkyDemon is going to help you do that. SkyDemon is particularly good because it warns you, and if you've connected up to Bluetooth with your headset, it will actually tell you that you're approaching restricted airspace. So that is a very good device to use. Running out of fuel, we've all done it, and it's normally because we haven't been checking in with our time, and we're not entirely sure how many litres we're burning per hour. So this is something which can be very easily managed using the watch on your device. So try to get a better understanding as to what you're burning an hour and give a buffer zone, okay? So don't push it to the max and find out you you actually run out of fuel 5k short of your goal. So another common flying mistake people are making is focusing on their cameras. We've already discussed that in a previous film. They snag points, but they're also something which distracts your attention. So when you're a newbie or an intermediate pilot and you're lit up like a Christmas tree with all your GoPro devices, this is a natural increase of risk, in my opinion, because you're focused on getting the shot. You can't do that until you've got a lot of experience. Using the speed bar and the trimmers, we've covered this in another film. However, it's something which people are going to want to progress onto. You need to set up your speed bar correctly on the ground. You also need to make sure that the trimmers are set to the right setting before you take off, and you only release them at the suitable height. Suitable height is going to be, for a beginner, around about 500 foot. It would be a good height to eventually release your trims and get on your speed bar, having parked your toggles. Old school paramotoring problem was people letting go of their toggles, the toggle being sucked back into the prop, having gone through the cage. This risk has been reduced, but it's still a risk. So if you want to part your toggle, decelerate a little bit, place it on the magnet, okay, make sure it's secure, and then let go of it. The issue with the speed bar is it can come loose, and whether that's during your takeoff or flight when it gets sucked back. If it's too long, it can go into the propeller. If it's too short, you're going to be really uncomfortable. You might even be applying speed bar in flight. So all of this needs to be set up on the ground, okay? And then don't forget, once you finish using your speed bar, you need to stow it again, and that can be very difficult with chunky gloves, and you need to make sure you've put the trimmers back to the right setting. One of the things which people like to do once they've got a bit more experience is shorten their brake lines. We've already discussed that you don't want to over shorten them, but one way around this is to take a wrap. But obviously with a chunky throttle in whichever hand you have your throttle in, there's the potential of actually snagging the brake line around your throttle. That's why my advice is you park the throttle free brake, and then you use that free hand to actually try and prepare the wrap correctly in your throttle hand, and then do the same thing on the other side. And you'll find that flying with a wrap makes everything a lot more sensitive and slightly more dynamic, and the feedback is better. You're flying with your arms higher rather than down here, which is a much more unnatural position to be in. That also comes with risk, and it means that you could be applying a lot more brake than you think. So gradually get to feel your glider and understand the amount of brake pressure you need to make a turn and make it come in for a nice landing. Worst case scenario, imagine we've had a mid-air collision or we've taken a big deflation for whatever reason. You should be able to instantly go to your reserve drills, and a lot of people don't practice these. Okay, skydivers are constantly rehearsing their reserve practice drills, and that's something which paramotor pilots should do as well. So depending on which side your reserve is, you should be looking, locating your handle, taking it out, bringing it in, and then throw and release. And bringing it in is going to just allow you to generate more momentum to throw. And when you're throwing, you're trying to time it so you're not throwing it into your wing. Okay? There's an argument as to what would you do first, kill the engine? In my opinion, you haven't got time to do all this. The propeller's still spinning as well, normally, if you've got a clutch. So the most important thing is get as much fabric above your head as possible. So imagine we've now deployed our reserve, it's coming out. Okay, we now need to stop our main canopy from doing what's known as mirroring, which means the canopy's off here and the reserve's off here, and we've got nothing above our head. So what you need to do is get your B's or C's and risers and break them along the span. And when I say that, that's where they connect at the mailons, and that will stop the wing from flying, allow you to get one side of the wing, pull it in, stuff it between your legs, and then do a parachute landing full position. So knees, everything together, arms in, neck down, pointing your hip in the way you're drifting, so that your legs become more of a banana shape. It's all great to have in theory, okay, and in reality, we could potentially have no time to do any of this and coming down a starfish. But ideally, we want to practice and rehearse these things. Okay, and in flight, we actually want to be touching our reserve, whichever side, and pretending to do these deployments. And be very careful as you touch, okay? Last thing you want to do is hook on your toggle, your throttle, and pull out the reserve handle. No doubt, yet again, there are many things I could add to this video. You could be here all day, so please leave your comments, and we'd love to hear from you. See you in the final video, which is landing. Bye.